Today, Canon have announced two new APS-C cameras into their mirrorless R range. We got a chance to check both of them out for a first look review. So we've got the R10, we've got the R7, both offering a lot, but in this video, we're going to focus on the R7. Now, it's worth mentioning up front, everything you see from the camera was shot on a beta sample. Okay, so we finally have an APS-C crop sensor camera in the R range, which is awesome. It was one of the few things that really felt like it was missing from that range, so it's great to see that added in. And let me tell you, the R7 is a very exciting camera to be looking at. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking this might not be as exciting as some of the releases we've seen over the last year, but this really does hold up, and you can feel the technology advances that we've seen in cameras like the R3 at play here. Things like the autofocus, which really does shine, and it just works straight out of the box. You don't even really have to think about it. We spent the whole day photographing animals at Port Lim Reserve, something this camera is going to be really great for, and all I did was set the subject detection to animals, and the camera did the rest. That really was a standout feature to me and great to see. So let's get into a little bit of the spec here. This really feels a bit like a 7D Mark II, a little bit like a 90D, but as is the case with the Canon R range, it's got some serious upgrades over those cameras. And as I mentioned before, we're actually seeing some technology we've seen in cameras like the R3, the R5, the R6. So we're looking at a brand new APS-C size sensor coming in at 32 megapixels. And honestly, the images look just remarkable. There's so much detail in the shots. I really noticed it while we were shooting, but once you get back and you get the pictures onto the computer, you can really see that detail shining through. The colors look amazing as well, and something that really stood out while shooting wildlife was how well it handled high ISO values. We were shooting pretty high shutter speeds and using lenses like the RF 800mm f11, so we really had to bump that ISO up to something like 5000, 6400, even all the way up to 10,000, but the images are so clean. I actually couldn't believe how well it was handling it. And that is such great news for wildlife photographers, for sports photographers, because this pairs extremely well with lenses like that. The 600mm f11, the 800mm f11, of course, that's super lightweight, 100 to 400, f5.6 to 8. So it's great to know that you can use those with those high shutter speeds you might need to use for that kind of photography. So obviously with the APS-C crop sensor, you're getting more reach out of these lenses. But with the 32 megapixels, you can also crop in as well while retaining a lot of detail. So it's great for things like wildlife sports, again, anything where you might want to get as much reach as possible. And it can actually shoot up to 15 frames a second or even 30 frames a second with the electronic shutter. And that's all with full AE and autofocus tracking. Now, speaking of autofocus, I touched on it a bit at the start of this video, but this really is fantastic. You've got that dual pixel CMOS AF2 in the camera, and it actually feels really similar to cameras like the R3, which is incredible really when you think about it. It really is fantastic. And once I set that subject detection to animals, as I mentioned earlier, it was tracking everything from rhinos to deer to birds to tigers without me having to do pretty much anything at all. It really freed me up to focus on things like composition, and it was so good I actually completely forgot about the autofocus, which is probably the highest praise that I could give. We're also seeing in-body image stabilization in the R7, which gives up to 7 stops of IS when paired with the optical IS of an RF lens, which I found particularly useful when shooting handheld video. So while this camera is great for stills, it's actually no slouch for video either. Not totally surprising, since cameras like the 90D are actually great for video as well, but it's awesome to see here. In fact, along with shooting 4K up to 60 frames a second and full HD up to 120 frames a second, it also has C-Log 3, something that I hadn't expected to see, but that makes this a very capable hybrid system. Now that 4K is also up to 10-bit 422, so you've really got a lot to play with here. So what about the camera itself? Well, it's small, it's light, that's not particularly surprising, but it still has a very nice comfortable grip. It feels good in the hands. As I mentioned earlier, it pairs extremely well with some of the more affordable telephoto lenses in the RF range. So the 800mm, the 600mm f11 lenses, the 100 to 400, and with that IBIS, it does make for a really lovely handheld system. Now there's a few changes on the camera. The joystick and the control wheel have been combined, which I actually really quickly got used to and I really enjoyed. It's actually very intuitive once you're you're used to it, but otherwise Canon shooters are likely to be right at home here. The EVF is nice and bright and clear, and you've got that flip out screen as well, which you either love or you don't. Personally, I really like it. I find it very useful, and it's nice to see it on this camera. Now, one thing that was very interesting, I shot around 700 shots, and then on top of that some 4K video, all on the R7. And the battery was still about half full at the end of the day. Something definitely worth noting, because this really can go a long way. It takes the LP-E6NH battery, and it really does seem to make great use out of it. Otherwise, you've got a headphone and microphone jack, as well as dual card slots, so it feels very complete in that sense. Now, to be honest with you, I was trying to think of something negative to say about this camera, but honestly, it ticks every box that I would have wanted to see from an APS-C camera in the Canon R range. I think this is going to be amazing for wildlife photographers, for sport photographers, and for anyone who wants to get into that Canon ecosystem with a lot of the new tech, but at a slightly lower price point. Now, you can check out the camera in the link in the description. We've also got a first look review of the new R10 on the channel as well, so make sure to check that out. Give us a like if you enjoyed the video. Of course, don't forget to subscribe for more content all the time. I'll see you next time, but until then, thanks for watching.